73% of kids between the ages of 8 and 11 now have their own smartphones. 73%. Now let's put that in perspective. Their parents, the parents of a 10-year-old today, when they were 10, we didn't have Google. This changes everything, and it's happening so quickly because what it means, we might think about it as technology, but what really is happening is those kids now have control of everything they do in our space. And the only thing I really want to say about that before we really jump in is we don't see this as bad news at all.
It's a massive opportunity.
Yeah, this is not a sky is falling moment. We're incredibly fortunate because we've kind of been sensing that something was going to come along and go, you got to pay attention. Well, it's here, and it's not that the sky isn't blue anymore, it's just now kind of greenish, and that's okay. Nothing bad's going to come from that. So with that, would you talk a little bit now about the changes that are happening?
Sure. So, you've been hearing all day about, particularly with the millennial audience and engagement on social and mobile, and how the leagues and sports and everyone has to adapt to that new universe. We're here to tell you that new universe is even more compelling when you look at the younger ages. Because take a look at kids 5 to 7, right? In 77% of them, 3/4 of kids 5 to 7 have at their disposal the ability to choose their content anytime, any place, anywhere they go.
Their own tablet, right?
Their own tablet.
They're using a family tablet, they have their own tablet.
And the main issue there is that now they're able to dictate terms when it comes to content consumption.
Right.
And that idea has transpired to the tween market, to that 8 to 11. And for the last couple of years, we tell, the Hasbros and the Nickelodeons and also that was there was a clear divide where below 11 was a tablet space, right? It was less mobile. Sometimes you could take it in the car if you had one that had a cellular signal. But the reality is now that smartphone on that next slide, the reality is that smartphone is now heading into that young kid space, and that's changing everything. Like you said, ownership, right, of content and when and where they're going to consume it.
Well, and I think it's this really interesting issue where people talked a lot of lip service. Oh, this is going to be the digital natives. And that hits the trades and everyone reads about it. Now from a business perspective, from a P&L perspective, from a content development perspective, from a distribution perspective, it is actually hitting the actual market in a real way today.
Yeah, in other words, if you're waiting till they're 18 to 34 to think about them, you're done. Everything changes. And again, to put this into context, they don't know life without a smartphone if they're 7 years old or younger. It's like saying, what is a chair? It's part of their DNA, right? And for anybody who's in that 30 plus, so their parents, that's not that case. We're adding it on and still coming to terms with it. They have come to terms. They are there. But that's just the beginning of the problem. That's just the beginning of the problem, or the challenge, should I say. What you have on the top are the percentage of people who say this is my favorite thing to do on the internet. I may not have a pointer here, so I'll just kind of fake it. Upper left, it's 12 to 13-year-olds, and it's in a very narrow window in a period of 6 years where it goes from 16% to 29% saying streaming is important. If you look at the age 14 and 15 over that 7-year period, what you'll see is that it happens in a different way, that streaming ends up being in the middle, but not as powerfully as it has already for 12 to 13. Here's my point. We've been spending our time looking at 12 to 17-year-olds. I've been yelling at the sports audience that they're in decline and you have to do something about it. And I stepped back and said, what happens if I just look at 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, 17? They are 3 completely different patterns. And what that means is that it makes no sense anymore to talk about generations. What is generation? What are the millennials? That's a 20-year wide period. The front end of that group didn't have Google. Those who were 10 years into it didn't have a smartphone. Everything changes within 2 years. I'm not saying every 2 years, within 2 years. You make business plans, are you going to base them on something that was before Google 20 years old? Why do you talk about generations like that? How about, would you build a business plan based on something that was true before smartphones? So tell me what's going to be true 5 years from now. We got nothing. And it's not just in those age groups. The thing that made it very sobering for us was the fact that their data collected in a different way from ours showed the exact same results.
And that's where that synergy between Rich and Luke on Trends and KidSay came in to say, we're telling the same story. We're seeing the same progression. And that idea of looking at a generation is so moot and so counterproductive. You've got to really look at what's happening on the ground now. And you see it with the 8 to 11-year-olds. You see even a more dramatic spike.
Right.
Are 8 to 11-year-olds doing less social networking than they were in the past? No, of course they're not. They're doing more of it. Are they playing games less? Of course they're not. But what they say they do most often is watch video. They find the content. They find the content that is for them. They have a myriad choices that they can go to, and they say, I want the one that's for me. I'm a 9-year-old girl. I will find it.
And
I was going to say, what's really happening here is that the psychographic definition of these age groups is more important than the demographic definition of the age groups.
Well, and what's going on developmentally, too.
Yeah,
so their parents,
absolutely.
their kids, their teenagers, and those dynamics, which are constant.
Yeah, meanwhile, historically, from a generational perspective, probably as nuanced as we got about this was, oh, you're leading edge generation or trailing edge generation. It's just too much of a big bucket to be effective on what your business plans are going to be to execute against that plan.
Well, so now here's another really critical part of this change. Not only are they in control, but if they're in control, as compared to what? Now, most of you are closer in age to them than you are to me. But when I was growing up, we had primetime television. We had very few things we could do. It was sports. It was watch TV. And the providers of things we could do in our free time, they controlled it all. It was on their time, on their day, in their way, in their places. We're not going to change when the football season is. We're not going to change the football teams. We're not changing any of that. What we could do in our free time controlled us. Anyone over 11 is able to deal with the ambiguity between properties which are trying to control them with time and the fact that they have this freedom. If you're under the age of 11, you're not putting up with this. We were in a discussion. I was in a discussion with one of our clients yesterday. Says, yeah, that's right. I got a 4-year-old. She has her own tablet. She only gets a half-hour a day. Then we put it up. And then, later in the day, we go to watch TV. She says, I want to watch this show. And I said to her, it's not on now. It has to be on now. That 4-year-old can't imagine not being able to watch the show she wants to watch on TV. That's not her world. This changes everything.
But from an opportunity perspective, which is really interesting, is that it does empower a whole new suite of potential content.
Completely.
That can be empowered to a new generation of consumers, which is really intriguing to content creators in the sports ilk as well. And then also on top of that, if you happen to be an MLB fan sitting in China or sitting in India, you now have a much broader global reach of fandom that you can leverage into. So that's why the sky is not falling. It's shifting, the landscape's shifting. But if it's played well and architected appropriately, there's actually massive opportunity that comes along with it.
Well, and the people who are going to win are the ones who first start looking younger.
Embrace it.
Right? Yeah, who embrace it.
Yeah.
What does that mean? They're starting younger to understand what the new world looks like, and that's where these guys are really good. Realize you get moments, and we kind of talk about that. You get moments, you don't get days. And the fact that they control it. And there's massive amounts of competition. But now let's take another dynamic. There's yet another dynamic in this. Not only is it out of control for us, but there is this sense of relevance overall that we're mistaking because we're saying, for example, with games are too long. Could not be further from the reality of what the problem is. That is a perspective of somebody who comes from a cultural constant who controls content, right? So if we say these 11-year-olds or younger are doing everything in bits and drabs, that's largely right. But then how do you explain binge watching? Where they will watch 6, 7, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours in a row of the same show. I confess, me and my wife, Most common statement between us when we're watching TV at night is, another? Right? And but the point is this. I could start a show, watch 30 seconds and say, no, gone, I'm done, you lost me. Or I could go, that's okay, get through one and go, all right, another. It may be 53 episodes, and if I so choose, if I'm so stupid, I can watch all 53 in a row if I want. So I'm willing to spend the 53 hours, and every age group is. The point is, they get to decide how much they watch, when they watch, and how they watch, and that's what this is all about.
It's the modality of engagement.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
the key there is the engagement.
Right.
The idea that they're compelled to be there for something that's satisfying them. It's helping them be kid in the moment. It's helping them become who they wish to be.
Right.
It's that medium for them that enables that to happen.
Aspirational.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny because in the earlier discussions we didn't talk about this at all. But again, they're already in that world, but at a time in their life when they're creating their world. So we're all created. We're all adolescent, and we kind of have a sense of who we are. So that's even more powerful. So that's not just what they do in their free time that's being defined by this. It is integrally involved in who they are as human beings.
Well, and you mentioned earlier about that's the seminal point in which you want to hook them.
Right.
If you can hook them in that sort of developmental stage,
Right.
you likely have a fan for life.
Right.
And the lifetime value of that fan is going to be unprecedented if you get them at that young of an age.
Let me give you an illustration. I'm going to give you two illustrations of that from baseball. First, if you take your kid to a game, their first game before the age of 5, they'll go to 58% more games per year for the rest of their lives than somebody who doesn't go to their first game until they're 14. Powerful? Absolutely. Now let's debunk generations a little bit more. What's the average age that a parent today takes their kid to a game? And by the way, better than half of all parents do. Most people tell me 7, 8 years old. It's 2. You know what that means? They're millennial parents. They're not wanting, fast, wild, and crazy. They want the same experiences. That's why we're saying the sky isn't falling. We just need to recognize where the sky is forming now, and it's in those greater in-depth relationships.
And this youth market issue is tethering into millennials who value the experiential economy far more than goods. So, for example, for my generation, having a house and a Mercedes in the garage was my badge of honor that I've made it professionally. Right? Now it's for millennials and younger, it's about having that shared experience and the value of that shared experience, not only the intimacy at the game amongst a nuclear family, but also how they broadcast that out to their general network, sort of proving to the world, look how close we are, we're actually sharing this experience together at a baseball game.
And this is where Rich and I, really see coming at kids at this age is there's that universal element of the bond to the family, of that experience and the richness of that. You're not only tapping into the fun of the moment, you're tapping into the existential love that's there, right? And that really brings meaning. And that's why that engagement between parent and child at these younger ages is so crucial.
Well, and we're going to come back to that because that really is the solution in a large sense. But just in case there's anybody in the room who thinks there isn't a problem, we left this slide up here for quite a while. We have seen these declines coming for 15 years. And if this is an eraser, I'd erase millennial because it's only in the last month we figured out there's no value to the title generations. But we still use that age group, right? Those born 1980 to 2000, dropped from general avid fans from 48% to 28.9%. And we've been saying, you got to do something, and we really didn't do anything about it. And so some of you are saying, well, part of the reason is because let's look at aging. A couple of things here that are really pretty powerful. If you look at it by age group, the greatest losses we've seen are males 12 to 17 in sports overall across the board. And then about 5 years ago, we started seeing the critical mass males 18 to 34 decline. And that's when people got nervous about it. At the same time, why aren't we doing anything about this? Because we're still making money. And the biggest problem I have is that our clients won't act for the future if their quarterly reports are good. And the people who work for them won't have the courage to step up and do those kinds of things either. And what you see on the bottom lines are males who are growing in interest. My generation is much more vital and lively than my parents' generation was by far, and because I'm a baby boomer, it's a lot bigger. So we're still giving you the cash. Not for long. The problem is we've done nothing to invest in that love of sports. You know what happens if you do? Look at Title IX and look at females. In the face of 20 years of explosive competition from things online, they've remained stable and even grown. Title IX is the only thing investing in the love of sports on a play or a fan level. Don't make a mistake about this. Sports don't build fans. Fans build sports. The previous presentation talking about franchises, I love that. The idea that they're going to be truly involved is really powerful. And make no mistake about this either. 2016 was the year that it hit. We've been talking about it for 15 years. I honestly thought we had a couple more. It's here. Double-digit declines in media for sports for all the major sports. All the major sports. EPL had 19% this last year. And people will say to me, but Rich, look at the finals for the NBA, the best since 1998. We all love fireworks, right? And we'll still come for fireworks. Is that going to sustain the sport for the season? Is that going to keep the audiences there? Is it going to keep the intensity of what we do in place? And the answer is no.
For example, by the way, just to bring this to life a little bit, Formula E, which is mostly in Europe and actually a great new circuit on the scene, from a social media perspective, if you actually vote for your teams, the car on the track will get a boost, an actual performance boost based on that fandom coming through. If you're a legacy sports enthusiast or motorsports enthusiast, that might be considered sacrilege, that the fans can actually control what's happening on the circuit. But in this next generation, it's actually very intriguing. They're leaning into the issue and saying, all right, if the fans vote for these top three teams, on race day, they can actually boost those cars and get more power into the engine, which is very intriguing.
And that's where we see with younger kids in all of these experiences, the more that they're involved, right? The more that there's that relationship between the brands or the leagues and the kid, in a sense that feels like they get me, and they want me, and I feed back to them in a relationship is where, you know, the answer will be with kids.
Well, and if you step back and think about it, I'm going to keep building the negative case just for a minute, because before we talk about the good side of this, let's be sure what we're talking about. So we saw these declines for 12 to 17, and you're going to show this in a slightly different way in the migration for the younger kids. And we decided to look at 12 to 17-year-olds in a bigger picture, and we have a lot of variables on technology as a whole. And so what we did, the key factor here that really alarmed us, from 2012 to 2016, the percentage of 12 to 17-year-olds who said they were online most of the day went from 20% to 40%. Now let me be clear about that. If I asked you, how many of you spend most of the day online? I do. No, I mean, is that something we're proud of? Is it something we're even conscious of? So I'm telling you, it may be 40%, but it's actually more than that. Now, what does that mean in terms of sports? If you're online most of the day, what we did is the two on the right are the dominant things for 12, 17-year-olds in general online activity. The two on the left are sports. On the far right is streaming. 18% of the population says that's very important to them. 52% of 12 to 17-year-olds and 44% of 18 to 34-year-olds. Social networking, 20% overall. 50%, draw a line there, the percentage who watch 8 or more hours of sports on TV, which is a big deal, 20% of the population, those who are online most of the day, 19. 12 to 17-year-olds dominate everything in sports. It's less there.
This is important from an opportunity perspective. Overall consumption of media is skyrocketing. So it's shifting, it's changing.
Yeah. Well, and
whether it's
right
scripted television, non-scripted television, news, sports, it doesn't matter. The actual total tonnage of consumption is skyrocketing upward. In fact, for the most part, people are working an additional work week of just consuming media. So on top of their 40-hour work week or 50-hour work week, they're doing the same on a consumption basis as well. So there's a lot of tonnage here.
Yeah.
How it's shifting and how it's maneuvering and how it's being consumed is the question. And how do you lay into that and plan for that for the future? But it's actually a good thing from a consumption standpoint.
That's absolutely right, Keith. And there's another piece of that. 20 years, or when I was growing up, there was no competition, and we've measured for 30 years What are the priorities? Time with family and friends are the highest priority in free time. You have personal activities, productive activities, outdoor, going out on the town, movies and such. And always, for the 30 years we've measured it, the two bottom things have been sports fan activity, not playing sports, but sports fan activity and watching sports TV. I'm a social psychologist. I should have known this. My dissertation was on the adolescent, how media affects adolescence, and I completely blew this. The issue was there was no competition. Here's how it works. If I want to do something and there's only one thing I can do, I don't have to make a choice. As soon as I have to make a choice between two things, whatever I choose is a priority. And that's what's happening. We now have to prioritize. And what we're losing in this space is that people aren't prioritizing. And I'll tell you why. Because we aren't doing anything to earn that priority. We're not doing the things that say, this has heritage value to you. It's more important than other things. It has a lot of legacy to it. It's a great experience. We have assumed for 50 years that the fans would be there, that if you built it, they would come, and they did. Sports hasn't changed. It's just as valuable. It's just as powerful. We just have different work we have to do to get them there. I'm going to skip right over that one.
Yeah, so where Keith was talking about that shift, you see this in very dramatically in this slide. What it's measuring is you have kids 5 to 7 years old right here reporting themselves on the devices in their room, right? The electronic devices. Basically the things that help them consume the media that was traditionally for them, and I'm talking traditionally, 5 years ago, frozen DVD, et cetera, right there. And then their mom's reporting the same thing. And from 2013 to 2017, why have all those devices left their room? Because now they have a tablet. Now they have control and can go, as Rich was saying about choice, now they have choice. They're not limited to that disc and the choices of that disc. They have an infinite variety of places to game, to watch video, to do all sorts of different things. And so that access to the internet is where they're at.
Well, and it wasn't 20 years, it was 5 years. Keep going.
And so, and we see this again with moms and their reported use of tablet. Kids 5 to 7, in that same 4-year period, everyday use reporting of doubles. And as Richard said, moms are not always proud to report these kind of things. So these numbers would often be depressed because they're not want to be, oh, my kid's on a tablet all the time. They're still a social.
My digital babysitter.
Right.
That's
okay,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I would say those numbers are a little bit depressed, but you see right there in kids 5 to 7, that's where those kids are at. That's where their engagement is.
Let's give a little context to that. So how many of you caught the story in Colorado about a guy who's starting a petition to make it illegal to sell a smartphone to anybody 13 or under, or to buy it for them, right? So you can't buy it if you're that age or under, right? That's irrelevant. When this many people already have a smartphone, that's like saying, okay, you don't get pants anymore. You can't do that. You can't take that kind of thing.
You can't put the genie back in the box.
That's exactly what we're saying. So now CBS, I think, did a video series. It was like a very, very long segment, like 5 minutes, where they had families put cameras all over their house. Maybe you saw this thing. And then they had kids, 5 to 7, and they're on tablets at the supper table. And they're substituting out people for their families. So like it's somebody else sitting there that nobody knows, somebody in a gorilla suit. They put a horse in the living room, and the kids don't even notice it. So there are these concerns about how absorbed and attached they are to these devices. And now the pediatric doctors are saying you got to limit the amount of time a 2 to 3-year-old has on a smartphone, right? That's how pervasive this is. These are all in the last month.
But our sports league's creating that surprise and delight that the younger generation is now looking for. We do have to talk about the content. And I know there's aspects of how you control what's on field, and that makes perfect sense. But the ancillary programming, how you bolt on additional engagement, can be re-architected to build in more surprise and delight, get kids more engaged, and actually put them into the fan funnel, which is my main point. Ultimately, these kids have to engage the fan funnel, and we have to drive them down. To your point earlier, that fan funnel was organic.
Yes.
5 or 15 or 10 or 20 years ago. It's not organic any longer. You actually have to lean into it and push them down the funnel. And that's a new paradigm, I think, for the sports industry overall.
And something that you had said earlier regarding this idea, this change might not be good news for Fox and those
No,
kind of
I-
short
delivers,
term.
but for the league sports,
Yeah.
with all the different ways that you can engage a kid, and the kids are looking for it. If you find them, right, if you give them that kind of engagement, that kind of thing that they're looking for, they'll be there for you. They might consume you, all right? They might create a relationship in a different way than we did, which is sit down and watch a 3-hour ball game, but they're watching Aaron Judge highlights and they're doing all sorts of things. They're engaged in the sport.
The point is options, whether it's linear broadcast, whether it's SVOD, whether it's the internet, social media engagement, digital, snackable content, 3-hour football games, whatever it might be. The point is the power and control is shifted to the consumer. And on any platform or any device or any distribution mechanism, we have to acknowledge what the value proposition is of that mechanism and then lean into it and really offer enhanced services through it.
Before we kind of start getting to the best of the best news,
And I'm
are
gonna keep
there
you
any
honest,
questions?
we have about 10 minutes left, so.
No? Yeah? Yes? Yeah, okay, right back here.
Obviously, it's essential to be able to hold, younger generations through the funnel, as you're saying, through advertisements and ways of engagement. But when we were talking previously about, binge watching, the greatest appeal of that is because there are no advertisements, and obviously, sports games would be significantly shorter if there wasn't those commercials, every other play and the TV timeout. So how do you think the relationship with sports media, younger generations, and advertisements are going to have to try and, rearrange themselves together?
Yeah, for the sake of the video, let me restate the question, and forgive me if I don't get it exactly right. But given that with binge watching, you don't have to watch the commercials, and we're talking about doing shorter things, aren't there things the leagues could do, for example, to remove that, find another way to monetize it to make it work? And I'm going to piggyback on your question and shoot this at Keith, because this is right.
Valid point. No, it's an absolutely valid point.
Well, but these are the questions
how
they're gonna
do you
ask.
safeguard the existing ecosystem and financial mechanisms around sports, even though the landscape is kind of shifting at your feet? And I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question that everyone's asking right now. I don't think anyone has the solution. I think what is changing, though, is the older paradigm was, we have to make these absolutely ginormous bets and bet the house on it, that it's going to end up being this way, and that bet's going to win for us. Now I think the industry as a whole is moving toward an ecosystem of death by 1,000 cuts. How do we dabble in dribs and dabs and find a million different ways to engage consumers, and hopefully that total tonnage of engagement will start to level the playing field from an advertising perspective or sponsorship perspective as well. So it's yet to be known exactly what's going to happen, but I think what was maybe 10 years ago of a major player in sports saying, here's my big ginormous bet, and I'm just going to really double down on this and see if it'll work. Now everyone's saying, hey, listen, we got to try all these different avenues of engagement, and whatever one seems to win, we'll start pushing more behind. The ones that fall off, fall off.
And I would say,
which is a half answer. I admit is a bit of a half answer.
I would say something else that that kind of echoes on that idea. Extremists came out with some data that said that Netflix kid is watching 6 days less of advertisement than that kid, that traditional cable TV kid, and that's a 24-hour days, right? So that you're talking about. If you now that down to about a 6-hour, right, watching day, that's a month less of ads, and then you've got the other thing. Kids are actively, we could go salutary neglect and say we weren't hearing that ad. Kids now, they're looking for that skip ad. And if they can't get that skip ad, then they're going on to another video. They're being trained to actively ignore any of those messages. And so it is a concern, and I think Keith is right on that idea.
Keith, for those who may not know Keith, he's at WMEIMG, but he's in charge of all of their intelligence and insights globally, and it goes across sports, it goes across entertainment, a lot of things, and again, it is globally. So, and he's interfacing with everybody involved in the chain, the producers, they are producers, the sponsors, and everybody else. This woman has raised a very bold kind of statement and question, and what I want to ask you is, so we've seen this coming for 25 years. We've had the internet for 25 years, and the attitude in the industry has been, well, we know it's coming, but it's not here yet. How do we get them past the fact that it's here?
I think the legacy mentality of kind of circling the wagons is actually finally imploded. I don't think anyone believes in really circling the wagons anymore. You have to re-engineer what your content offering is and what platforms it's gonna flow through. And I think I think there's myriad companies doing myriad things to try to engage on a different kind of level with consumers. Advertising, sports sponsorship, all of it will come into the funnel as well. But I think that the most opportunistic issue coming up right now is the fact that people are acknowledging that it's going to happen. It's already here. There's no delaying it. There's no circling the wagons. There's no defending it. You cannot build a moat around some of these issues because the genie is already out of the box. And what are you going to do? So I think that there's, but it's difficult because you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar traditional ad inventory ecosystem that is being pressured by new platforms, younger generations trained to not engage in commercials, right? And of course, clearly commercials can be more engaging, be more, be better created and actually, be better embedded, whether it's integrated versus a 30-second ad. There's a lot of options there, but no one truly knows exactly how it's going to net out, and it'd be a fallacy for me to say this. It's a completely new issue.
And it's saying everything's going to change in 2 years. My clients ask me what's going to happen in 5 years. With virtual reality and the impact of artificial intelligence, we can't have any idea. So, good setup.
But does issues, for example, of AR, VR, create new opportunities for content distribution and for advertising as well? So now, again, what was considered a threat is now something to lean into, and is an opportunity for Madison Avenue to engage.
And kids have told us that they will engage with advertising
100%.
of brands that they have a relationship with, that they trust will give them something that they want. They will do that. They will seek it out, and they will say, "Oh, I welcome that."
If it's relatable and authentic, and it's given to them in the right ecosystem, in the right form of content, they will engage with it.
Which is here's the punchline. We have no clue what's going to be true with technology in 5 years. Nobody can predict that, no question. So is there anything constant we can build on? Yes, there are 4 things, and they're all part of the same thing, and that is being human will never change. You'll never be an adolescent and then a baby. So the process of growing up will always be the same, number 1. Number 2, the consumer purchase model will always be the same. Babies will never buy clothes or food for their parents. Number 3, human emotions will always be the same. Sadness will be sadness, frustration, happiness, joy, all will be the same, just delivered with different systems. And number 4, we're not all going to move into pods where we live by ourselves and go online. We need this. We want this, and relationships are critical. Last thing, and I'll turn it to him. 77% of kids 12 to 17 say, I've maxed out. I actively look for ways to get offline. The opportunity here is to build relationships with people, with family and friends that we know will be true and attached. And sports does that better than probably just about anything.
True.
So just adding on to this question here, we're talking about advertisements and the 30-second spot kind of fading away, not being as effective. But now we've got user-generated content. So if you look at Snapchat, the taco head, the Gatorade shower, influencer marketing, and those influencers creating branded content. What do you guys think about that space? What's your opinion in that area?
So you talk to the kids themselves, and they will tell you that the number 1 thing they will search for, looking for a new video, is from a YouTuber that they like. So those influencers are really powerful. But here's the thing. If you're tacking on that YouTube influencer to your brand, and it's not an authentic feel, and that person is selling it and not living it, is not a fanboy, or is not really engaged with the product, they're going to sniff that out in a second. They have now become experts, right? Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule, like that he kind of surmised from social scientists. I say they have a 10,000 image rule. They've seen so many images, they know authenticity from what's being sold to me, right? They can intuitively know that difference. And so if you're tacking on a YouTube influencer, you're going about it the wrong way. If there's a genuine connection, right? If there's authentic relationship between that YouTuber and that brand or that experience, that kid will get that and say, boom, that's exponentially more powerful than just getting a spokesperson.
And from a WME IMG perspective, we have a huge roster of social influencers. that we offer to, multiple brands, multiple properties, scripted television, non-scripted television, the entire ecosystem of media is now being influenced by these influencers that are part of our roster of talent.
Other questions? We still have a few minutes left. Right here. Hi, Denise.
I work with all three major leagues. I know you've got no time left, but is there one thing that you would tell all three major leagues that they need to do over the next years?
No question about it. Focus on the parents of kids under the age of 11, right? Because the extent to which they can, here's the challenge. We learned this bizarre thing in research. In fact, Denise was attached to this. We have 100,000 stories about the love of baseball, and we go through it, and then all of a sudden they'd say, and that's when I got the tattoo. So we started focusing on tattoos, and sure enough, if you do what we call Google Inc. research, so what you do is say NBA tattoos, however you want to do it that way, but do teams, and it's much more powerful, and then see what comes up. You're going to be astounded by how many and how rich they are. They're incredible. I'm here to tell you, Major League Baseball didn't put a St. Louis Cardinals tattoo on this guy, and certainly the Cardinals didn't either. But I'll tell you who shows up doing it most: grandpa, grandfather, mother, brother, somebody who was connected to it. The love was so great that it ended up being a tattoo. Here's the deal. We have maybe 5 years, and I'm saying 5 years is the only thing you can count on. The people who still have tattoos, who have a love of sports that's so strong that they want to be identified for it for the rest of their lives. So what it is you go and remind them why they love the game, number one, and be sure and ask them if it was so important to them in their lives and growing up. Do they really want their kids to not have that same experience, and make it possible for every single kid to play and attend? So if you're baseball, it's go straight to a game. If it's the NFL, it's before they're a high school. It's the high school bucket list. I'm going to take you to an NFL game.
Also,
it's the parents of those kids that are priority number one.
By the way, my favorite shots now that I actually seek out, I love when there's a dad at a baseball game with a baby in his arms, and the foul ball's coming over, and he sacrifices his kid to catch that. That's fandom.
That's fandom.
And it's actually good on both fronts. He's obviously a fan, willing to sacrifice his kids. But that kid, that's a baby. That's someone under the age of 5, actually, literally, probably under an age of a year, actually at a game enjoying baseball for the first time. So it's actually a double whammy of a positive whenever I see those crazy videos on the evening news, because if that could be replicated 1 million more times, sports will be rocking and rolling for years to come.
Well, and sports, when with all the games, and they're collecting all the video, and then they go to do, and they've been able to do tests to see which are most popular. It's not the plays on the field. It's exactly these. It's what the fans do.
Fans
that are
dancing.
The most popular.
Fans, yeah, 100%.
No question about it.
When I heard the MLB and the tennis and NASCAR and La Liga up here, the thing that I heard that was best from a kid's perspective is listen to them. Give them to the content the way they want it, not the way you think they want it, not the way you think would be best to get your sport across. Give it to them the way they want it. If they want Aaron Judge with puppy ears and shooting a rainbow, give them to him that way. Whatever way that will give you that kind of real engagement.
And brands, for the first time, both brands and the leagues, I believe, are starting to let loose of the grip, the tight grip on ownership of their brand. They're finally starting to let people play with it a bit. And I think that in and of itself is a massive change.
So if you take away nothing else, take away that 5th point. It's not coming, it's here. If you don't know them by the time they're 11, you won't have them when they're 18.
And we are out of time.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.